Today we're very pleased to have with us Lorelei Craft. Lorelei is an author, producer, speaker, and coach. She was inducted into the Minnesota Women Business Owners Hall of Fame in April, and she has appeared on ABC, CBS, NBC, Fox, and PBS. Lorelei has written numerous books. 2 that she co-authored became #1 bestsellers. Her documentary on the building of the village at Osage by a remarkable group of 12 women has been featured on PBS 5 times. Lorelei usually speaks on business topics. Today, however, she is going to speak on a subject dear to her heart, that of the often forgotten history of women. Her topic is the forgotten women pilots of World War II. Welcome to Lorelei.
Hi. I'm going to tell you a story some of you have heard already, which is what happened to me the very, very, very first time I gave a public speech. And it was in Detroit Lakes, so I'm not, a little away from here. I'm not telling too many tales. This was in the days before women were allowed to join Rotary. And the Rotary in DL asked me to come and speak about the building of the village of the Smoky Hills, which many of you might remember was an incredible project that 12 women, local women, did it in 5 weeks and 5 days. So they said, come and talk to us about this. So when I get there, I'm the only woman in the room. And the priest gave the blessing on the food. And he said, Lord, we thank you for this wonderful weather we've been having for the tourists this summer. And we thank you, Lord, for the 30,000 people that came to town for a water carnival last week. And we thank you, Lord, for the village of the Smoky Hills. But don't forget, Lord, that women are taking over the world. And please don't forget that they need special guidance. Well, I was the only woman in the room, and all I could think to say was, what I wanted to say but didn't, was don't worry, I talked to God and she said it was okay. However, being the only woman in the room, I said nothing and the day went steadily down from that. Today I'm going to talk about the forgotten women pilots of World War II, and up there is their motto, we live in the wind and sand, our eyes are on the stars. I got a newsletter from one of the women's organizations I belong to, and there was a little blurb, and it said, there will be a reunion of the remaining living women pilots of World War II at Avenger Field in Sweetwater, Texas on May 26th. Who? I had never heard of them, and I was a history teacher. There was nothing in the books when I was growing up about these women. So I thought, who are they and why haven't I heard about them? So what I did was I ordered this book from the WASP organization, and it's called Flying for Her Country, the American and Soviet Women Military Pilots of World War II. I'm only going to talk about the American pilots today, but the Soviets had women pilots who actually engaged in combat. And the Germans called them the night witches. They were so good. They were very, very, very good. So I got the book and I started doing some reading on this and some research. And to give you a little background of what happened, okay, in 1939, Hitler invaded Poland. In May of 1940, he attacked France, Netherlands, the Belgium, and Paris fell by June of that year. In July of 1940, Germany began bombing England. And in December of 1940, Germany prepared for the invasion of the Soviet Union. Now, by 1942, the Red was what Hitler had already taken over. In less than 3 years, he had gotten control of more land than the Roman Empire. They even went into Africa, and they were pushing Rommel. Rommel was pushing them then back from the borders. We were not part of the war. the American public wasn't interested really at that point because of what had happened after World War II. You know, we had our fill of war, World War I. And however, we continued to supply the Allies with war materials. Roosevelt felt that we were going to be drawn in, and so he really put our economy on a war footing. You know, up the Army and the Air Forces. He got the domestic factories to retool. So instead of turning out cars, they started turning out tanks and ships and fighters. At that time, we had over 3,000 licensed women pilots in this country. And you have to remember, this is in a time before most women even had a driver's license. And so here we had these women, and these women wanted to join in and participate and serve their country. We had some very famous ones. Amelia Earhart, of course, was the first woman who flew solo across the Atlantic. We had Jackie Cochran. She held more speed and distance and altitude records in aviation than any other pilot, male or female. So all of these women wanted to participate and to serve. However, the military resisted it. They said it wasn't appropriate for women to fly. The female body was unsuited to the rigors of flying. Women were way too high-strung. A military doctor warned that women who flew airplanes would never be able to bear children. Sort of reminds me back in the late 1800s where a medical doctor said that if you taught a little girl to read, her uterus would shrivel up. Actually, we have some people in our country today who still believe that. They went to Eleanor Roosevelt and said, help us get into the military. And she tried, and it didn't work. But then came Pearl Harbor. December 7th, 1941, Japan attacked us. December 8th, we declared war on Japan. And December 11th, Germany declared war on the United States. Now, General Hap Arnold, who had been opposed to women in the military, okay, at this point said, you know what, we need them. We need women to ferry our troops, not our troops, but to the ships, to wherever they were being built. They had to be ferried to a battlefield area. They had to do test piloting of new planes. They had to do target. You know, they flew and they carried the targets behind them. And the gunners on the ground had practice at what they were dragging behind them, oftentimes missed. But anyhow, and so Hap Arnold said, you know what, we have got to bring our women into the military. At that point, the Nancy Love had something called the Women Air Force Service Pilots. And they merged with Jackie Cochran's group and created the WASP program, which is Women Air Force Service Pilots. And so they combined into one group. And they were all trained at Avenger Field in Texas. Primitive conditions, boiling hot, well, you know what Texas is like in much of the year. And very primitive, but these women went. 25,000 women applied to get into the WASP program, and only 1,078 made it in, and the rest washed out. It was so grueling that they just couldn't make it. This is what it looked like. It wasn't pretty either. Very, very, well, if you've driven through Texas, you know. And who were these women willing to give up their comfortable civilian lives to go into this very grueling program? Well, they were from all walks of life. They were socialites, actresses, teachers. I mean, it was amazing how they came forward. And what they had to do is they had to get their license, and they had to have hours of flying time. But they all had one thing in common, and that was a tremendous burning desire to serve their country. Look at how big the planes are. The requirement was you had to be 5 feet tall. I'm 5'2", so that gives you somewhat of an idea of, you know, how tiny these women were, and they were flying these humongous planes. They were a very special group of women. So they had to have a pilot's license and 75 flying hours. The men who decided to join in the Army Air Force did not have to have any background at all and no pilot license. So the women were really held to a much higher standard than the men were. Their schooling included instruction in mathematics, physics, map reading, charts, navigation, engines, weather, code and communications, plus physical training, and 210 hours of military flight training. The WASPs were the only service group that flew all 77 kinds of military planes. This is the one that's so astounding, the B-29 Superfortress. It was 99 feet long, and the wingspan was 141 feet. And the only way that I could even compute this as I was researching was I had a pole barn that was 40 by 80. And I tried to complete this plane. If my pole barn was 80 feet long, how much longer would this plane have been at 141 feet? Unbelievable. And these little 5-foot women were, actually what happened was it was the biggest plane ever built, and, and I don't mean to sound sexist here, but the men refused to fly it. They said, we're not going up in that. And so they flew in 2 WASPs. One of them was only 22 years old. And they flew it, and then they actually trained the men in how to fly that plane. It was a humongous plane. Yeah. Actually, almost 50 years later, one of the women, the 22-year-old who flew that plane, got this letter from a man. I realize it was a long time ago, but I want to thank you for helping me that day. You came to show us that the B-29 plane was not one to be feared. You were the pilot that day, and you demonstrated your excellent flying skills and convinced us that the B-29 was a plane that any pilot would be proud to fly. From that day on, we never had a pilot who didn't want to fly the B-29. It took him 50 years to write that letter, but we'll take it. Of the 1,078 who made it through the program and came out with their wings, they did ferry everything that the military flew. And when it was over, General Hap Arnold said, if another national emergency arises, we will not look again upon a women's flying organization as an experiment. We will know that they can handle our fastest fighters, our heaviest bombers. We will know that they are capable of ferrying, towing, test flying, and countless other activities which you have proved you can do. And 38 of these women died in service to their country. Unfortunately, there were many in the military who resented having women doing a man's job. In North Carolina, there's evidence that they actually sabotaged the women's planes and caused some crashes and some deaths. And it was very sad, but they found sugar in the gas tanks, which of course will stop an engine immediately. And at the same base where the women were towing targets, there was great cause that they felt to be very much afraid because they were actually shooting at them rather than at the targets. And when they would land with holes in their planes, the men would snigger a little bit about where women belonged. They did a tremendous job. They ferried over 60 million miles in that short amount of time from when they were organized and when it was disbanded in 1944. And as the war in Europe started winding down, there was this feeling of what are they going to do with the men pilots? And there was great trepidation about that. So they started planting stories in media about how awful the wasps were, and prima donnas and all kinds of things. The military even put out this booklet. Do you want your wife to work after the war? And yeah, it was not nice. And one of the fun things in here was, what do women want? Age-old question. And then stuff like this. A man doesn't have much of a home when his wife is out on the job. His buttons don't get sewed on, and if he wants to step out and have a little fun in the evening, the wife is just too tired or interested in something else. A man wants a wife, not a business partner. So even the Army and the Air Force people were part of this. Hey, we got to get the women out of there, and we have to have the men take over those jobs. It was truly an unfortunate thing, because the women had given not only of their whole heart and soul and spirit, but had given their lives as well. And unfortunately, they kept being promised that they would be part of the military, that they would get the same benefits as the men, that they would be able to get the same pay, the same housing allowances, everything that the men had, they would be granted as well. And it never happened, because right before it was supposed to happen, this big blitz went on about the WASPs and how they were taking away the jobs of the men. And so when it went to Congress in 1944, two problems happened. Congress was looking at cutting military expenditures, which is normal as wars start winding down. And the male pilots organized a very powerful lobby against this law. And the civil aviation organizations joined in, and even the veterans organizations lobbied against it. So in 1944, instead of getting the recognition that they deserved, Congress ordered them to disband. And the war was still going on, and they still needed planes, and they still needed ferrying and everything. And it was so idiotic, because on the day they were ordered to disband, there were hundreds of planes still sitting on runways waiting to be ferried to where they were needed. After the war, or not even after the war, after 1944, when they were disbanded, they couldn't get jobs flying. I mean, this brilliant group of women who had flown the B-29 Super Fortress, the only thing that the airlines would offer was, would you like to be a stewardess? Which, was somewhat offensive to them. Helen Ritchie, who is shown in this picture, was the first woman hired then by an airline, by Central Airline. Was that a precursor to I can't remember, anyhow. But Central Airline, and then I think it was one of these in the Midwest. And they hired her to pilot. And it didn't last very long, because the all-male pilots union forced her out. And not another airline would hire a woman pilot for 30 more years. Or would women be allowed in military cockpits? 30 years went by before that. 33 years later, Barry Goldwater stood up and said, this isn't right. Because when they were disbanded the day before the GI Bill took effect. They got nothing. It was like, pat, pat, pat on the head, little girl, go back to the kitchen. And so for 33 years, they received no benefits, nothing that a normal person in the service would get. And Barry Goldwater, who had flown with the WASPs in the war, said, this is not right. And so he started lobbying Congress to get the women certified as having been in the military. And it took him, the first year it was defeated, and then in 1977, the law was passed that gave them full military status, which was an amazing event. It took 66 years before they got the congressional gold medals. So it took a long time, long enough to have all the babies that they were supposed to have if they went home. So I read all of this, and I thought to myself, oh, and Dale said, do not do this. Do not pat myself on the chest. It makes noise. Anyhow, they were having a reunion of the remaining living women pilots of World War II on my birthday weekend. I was going to be 70. And I thought, that's a special day. I need to do something special. And I said to my kids, if you want to spend it with me, you got to go where I'm going. I'm going to Texas. And actually, I flew into Oklahoma City, met my daughter. We took a train to Dallas. Then we got a car and drove 200 miles west to Sweetwater, Texas. And we went to the reunion. It was one of the most amazing things I've ever been at. They're doing a national museum there to honor these women. And there were still 200 of them living. I mean, this is remarkable. I was born in 42, and these women were flying in 42. And there they were at this reunion, dancing, having fun. I mean, it was an amazing thing. And what they're doing is they are rebuilding the aviation tower and everything that goes along with it. These are just some shots from inside. During one of the days, they opened up the hangar and everybody could sit and visit and meet all of these women. And on the picture on the right, they have a special spot where they have all of the women's pictures. And in front of that, they have a cement tray with their handprint in it. I went around, I have little hands. I went around putting my hands, in all of these handprints. They were small women. They were not big when you think of them flying these huge, huge planes. This is my favorite one because she's from Faribault. Her name is Elizabeth Wall Strofuss, and she graduated in the class in 1944. Dynamite woman. She is now like 94 years old, and at that time she was 92. She was so good as a pilot that when she was 82, they let her fly a fighter jet. And when she was 92, they let her do it again. Amazing, amazing. The physical stamina and energy of these people. It was, well, I cried a lot that weekend, to be perfectly honest. I did. Here she was getting off the plane. She's in the red shirt. And then this is another woman getting off. What happened was each of the women were given a military escort. And so that military escort took them around, followed them around, got their food, whatever they needed, the military escort took care of. And it was so heartening to see the respect that these young women had for the women whose shoulders they stood on. It was truly something. The woman on that one, she was a colonel and was there with her military escorts. That's a close-up of Elizabeth. She looks really good for 90-something. And the picture on the right was when she was out on the floor dancing. She was out there almost all night. I wasn't even out there all night. So it was truly an amazing thing. The woman, the young woman here is a current jet fighter pilot. And those are the women, the young women. There are only 7, or there were only 7 in 2 years, last year. And she's showing with one of the military pilots, D. Walt Disney was so enamored of the story of the WASP women that he created this cartoon character, Fifinella. And they painted her on their planes. They had little things that they could wear, patches, and they have a statue of her there at the museum. Just a fun thing. This is part of what's there in the museum, is the recreation of their barracks. And just to tell you how primitive it was, first of all, look at the beds. Good night's rest, right? Oh, yeah, they were probably so tired they didn't care as long as they were laying vertical or horizontal. 12 women shared one bathroom. So they said, obviously, makeup and hair went out the door. It no longer was important anymore because there wasn't time and they didn't have the facilities to do it. At the reunion, it was really amazing. This one is called a Stearman? Stearman. Okay. This one is two men from Iowa have rebuilt two of those planes, and they flew them down to Sweetwater for this. So you could actually see, and get in some of these planes from World War II. It was very interesting. At the end of the day, there was a rainbow. And everybody cried. It was, double rainbow. It was just an absolutely beautiful thing. They are recreating this tower, the aviation tower, the hangars, the barracks, and the statue down on the bottom left is one that was actually sculpted by one of the WASP women after the war, and they call it the Graduate, and it's there. They have a lot of other fun things too. They have a wishing pool, and whenever a woman graduated and got her wings, she got thrown in the pool. So that was, and then they also have, almost like, the Vietnam Wall where they have all the names, they have that as well on the way to the wishing well, where they have the names of all of the women who got wings and who graduated, and a special section for the women who perished, the 38 women who died. For those of you who would like to donate to the museum, I think it is so important that we keep the story going and that there be a place, a national place, to honor and to recognize what the women did. That's their website. If you have an interest in going there, you can also read some more, and you can also find out and order books. They have a lot of books, they have a lot of things, so that you can read a little bit more about this. So, the Forgotten Women Pilots of World War II, a brave group of women, 3 from Minnesota, all from Faribault, Marshall area. So, I would be very happy now to answer questions because I couldn't get everything in a PowerPoint, but I'd be very happy to answer some questions with the understanding I'm not a military expert. Please don't ask me to explain one plane from another. Alice.
Do you know the name of the other ones from Faribault or the other ones from Minnesota, I should say?
Yes, Alice wanted to know whether I had the names of the other women, and yes, I do. I have a photograph, actually, I took by state, and so I did Minnesota, Wisconsin, and Michigan because those are the 3 states that I'm connected with. And so if anybody wants that, just my email is just Lorelei@LorelaiCraft.com. Craft with a K.
I know that one of the Minnesota women was Virginia Hope from Winnebago.
Yes.
And if you go to the Winnebago Minnesota Museum, they have her uniform and her memorabilia from the family there. It's really inspiring.
The comment was that Virginia Hope, right, was from Winnebago, and they have at the museum there all of her things. I believe, wasn't she the Wasn't there a recreation of her at the library last year? Oh, that was so wonderful. And that little boy who was there, he was what, maybe 10 years old? And he was so knowledgeable about planes and what went on and the war. And so when I knew I was going to give this, I had two thoughts. One, oh, I hope he comes because he could contribute so much. And two, I hope he doesn't come because I am not going to be able to answer all of his questions. He was even stumping this woman who played her from the Minnesota Historic Society. So I guess he's not here today. Yes.
We had the whole base there. We didn't have any planes. And we were waiting. We had students, and we had instructors, but no planes. And here comes, I think it was 10 come in at one time, all female. And I got to say, all one of them.
The comment was in Indiana where he was based. They needed planes. And so 10 planes came in with wasps on them. And many air bases, they just didn't expect it when a woman got off the plane. It was a real shock. And some of them were welcomed and some of them were not. So.
Caroline, someone back here asked a question. I wonder if she could repeat it. No, that's fine. Well, you said the second one too. Didn't Rhoda do that? No. Oh. But I do have a different question or from your perspective. You mentioned you had a nice slide up about all the rigorous training and education that the women were required to go through. The men did not.
No.
Or they had to involve.
The question is, did the men have to go through the same rigorous training that the women did? Yes, I'm sure they did. What they didn't have to have is any prerequisites coming in. They didn't have to have a pilot's license. They didn't have to have any flying experience. All they had to do was show up.
But it was still rigorous.
Oh, yes, it was rigorous. I mean, there's no doubt about it. Anybody that goes through military training, it's difficult. Yes, Emily.
Did they have bombs on any of these planes, or did they carry bombs?
No, they ferried the planes, although I shouldn't say no. I seem to vaguely remember somewhere in the back of my head reading that they also had to carry bombs to different places. Not locked and loaded, but obviously there. And I do want to tell one funny story that a woman told me yesterday, that her uncle was a mechanic, and this was in the Canadian Air Force, okay? And so it was their job to make sure that when the bullets came out, they were synchronized, that they wouldn't hit the propeller, okay? And the pilots, to make sure that that mechanic was right on, they made them take one trip up and around firing bullets to make sure that it was good. I told a woman in Canada that I talked with yesterday, I said, I'm going to tell that story because I think that is so hilarious.
I read something about that too. Since these are brand new things, it's like a brand new machine. A lot of things can go wrong. There were many times when the little pilots were in very difficult situations. Engines stopping,
Yes.
falling off, or they were taking off, or anything else.
Yeah.
Producing
Yeah. Oftentimes what they were is, the question was, that since a lot of these were new planes and refurbished planes, that they really put the women in a lot of difficult positions sometimes because they didn't know, what was going to happen. And the times were so hard, even getting rubber for tires was a difficult thing. And so tires were blowing on, landing and everything. So it was pretty bad. Another question?
Is Avenger Field a military base, and how public is it?
Avenger Field is not a military base anymore, I don't believe. I didn't see any evidence of that when I was there. It's open to the public. Okay, so you can go to Sweetwater if you're ever in Texas do go to Sweetwater. And you can go to the museum, and you can go through all of the exhibits, some of which I showed you today, and also see tremendous amount of history on the walls and everything of the women who served and the women who were there. They have a gift shop. They have all kinds of things. They've been really raising money to try and get everything done, you know, the hangars and everything, so that it is just as it was when the women flew.
Were they all on the States side, or did they even go to Europe?
I think they did fly some things to Europe and also into Canada, like Nova Scotia. So it was a dangerous time to be flying anywhere, you know, and especially when you did any kind of overseas traveling. So, Marty.
At the reunion, did any of the women speak? Did they talk about their individual experiences? Did they talk about what their lives have been like since the war? How they all got to be 90-year-olds? It really is amazing to have that many, I guess you call them nonagenarians.
Yes, yeah. No, they did. And we also all had the chance. They sat at tables and you could go and sit with them and talk. And they would share, you know, what their lives were like after the war, and how difficult it was for them to give up flying. You know, they had been at the top of the cream of the crop, and then to be told, well, you're a woman, go away. You know, one of my favorite sayings is, no one should be denied equal rights because of the shape of their skin. And they were. Marilyn?
Were there very many people like you who were just visitors and curious, or as a reunion, were they the people who were involved in the reunion?
The question was it just, you know, people like me who were curious and came, or were they only people who were involved in the reunion? It was hard for me to tell because I didn't know the families, but I do know that there were a great many families there, you know, granddaughters, great-granddaughters, grandchildren, people who were in love with the story like I was. And I'm sure that there were many people who came. I'm sure it was very publicized in Texas, you know, and so I'm sure that there were a lot of people there who were that. It was a big crowd. It was wonderful. They also did the groundbreaking for one of their buildings, and it was amazing to see all these women, you know, with their hard hats and their shovel, and they weren't just playing at shovel either. They were actually digging. Very physically fit yet. I think there was only one or two that I saw that had a walker or, you know, crutches or anything like that. Other than that, they were very, very, very spry, and most of them were thin. Maybe when I'm 92, I'll get there. No. They had come to terms with it. They were accepting of it. They didn't like it. But, you know, I think part of the reason they lived so long is because of their attitude. You know, when you can't change something, there's no point in dwelling on it. And so they went on to other things. Elizabeth, which is the one that I said was so neat. Well, I guess we don't need that anymore. Anyhow, she wrote a book, and Still Flying. And she's got a quote from Senator Goldwater on the back when he said, "What a wonderful surprise to meet you and receive your book. To be able to sponsor the WASP bill and have it passed was one of the great moments of my Senate career." So he really, you know, did see that. There's a couple of things in here. She talks about how she got the money to earn flying lessons. Now, mind you, she was earning $50 a week, okay? And the reason she loved flying was a neighbor took her up in his plane. And then he said to her, "You want to do a loop-de-loop?" And she went, "Yeah." And so he did, and he looked at her, and she was going, "Let's do it again." And after 10 of them, he was green. And she wanted to keep going. So she knew, and he even said to her when they came down, I have never had anybody survive that long, and I didn't think I could turn green. So she decided that she wanted to be a pilot, and she needed $100, okay? $100 was a great deal of money when she was only earning $50 a week, okay? So she went to see the bank president. She said, Mr. Call, I need $100,000. She rode her bike to the bank. He looked rather curious and asked Miss Wall, what do you need that money for? I answered, I'm going to learn how to fly. And he said, I have loaned money to women for college, travel, fur coats, houses, and cars, but never for flying lessons, and besides, women don't fly. Pointing at myself, I said with conviction, this one's going to. He took out the loan papers and asked, and what do you have for collateral? Too bad Roger's not down here right now, right? After he explained what collateral was, I answered, well, I have my bicycle. Mr. Call never said a word or broke a smile. He filled out the papers, I signed them, we shook hands, and off I went on my bicycle with $100 in my pocket. The happiest girl in the whole wide world. I was so buoyant I might have floated back to the airport. Imagine me in the Sky Club. I did learn years later that Mr. Call had co-signed my note himself. Try finding a banker like that today. Maybe it's better Roger's upstairs. He did know our family, and though we had little money, he knew we were honest, hardworking people. Having a good name is very important. And then she said, because of the G-forces, this is after she's already in the service, she said, even though the effects of G-force was not totally understood at this time, it was a standing order that no one, man or woman, was to fly more than 4 hours a day. She loved flying so much that what she would do, she would go out to the airport and she would wait for pilots to come in. And, some of those boys, she said, were returning from Las Vegas and sometimes didn't look so good. They looked a bit green, like the fellow who gave me my first ride. They would struggle into a plane and start sucking up oxygen. I'd ask them if they wanted me to fly their mission. And they usually said, okay. They'd go into flight operations, sign their name on the manifest, and then tell me what the mission was. They'd go off to bed, and I'd go off for the sky. So that's how determined she was, that she wanted to fly. A remarkable woman. And once in a while, if you watch at football, at the halftime, they'll have all of the veterans and stuff there at that time, and look for the redhead. She's still a redhead. And she's usually presented the flag and things like that. So I see her periodically at halftime.
Can you tell me how much was the problem of finding all the literature you needed to research this?
Actually, I had read the book and I thought, I can come and give a talk. And I spent the last week actually Googling and looking and researching because, it's been a long time, and even though I was a history teacher, I wasn't sure of my dates of when Hitler invaded Poland and, when the Blitz was in England and everything. And it needed to be put in context about why first they weren't allowed to be in the military, and then the absolute necessity of having these women do it and fly those 60 million miles. So, yeah, it was just a lot of research and a lot of interesting stories, so also about the women and what they did. Marilyn?
For the museum, did they get any nonprofit or government funding to help help them build that museum?
I don't know. The question was, did they get government help building the museum? Or nonprofits? Oh, I'm sure they have some nonprofits and some sponsors. If you go on the website, you'll actually see that there's sponsors for their website and things like that. And there were sponsors for the reunion as well. Plus, they get a lot of support, I believe, from the armed services, like with sending, the young women to be their, person, to stay with them all the time.
How many books were written on this? I've read two, but there are many more than that.
Yes, a lot of the women have books of their own. There's one, Pearl, gosh, I think her last name is Judd, a remarkable woman. And so a lot of them have books like this, like Betty's book, and which is just absolutely full of, pictures and history and all the way back to her family and why she wanted to get involved in flying and how she did. Yes?
Laura, has PBS done a documentary on these women pilots?
Yes.
There must be something, I recall seeing something.
Yes, it's called.
Burns need to
Yeah. The question is, has PBS done anything with this? And they did produce something called Fly Girls. So you can. I don't know if it's available like on Netflix or other places like that, but I do have a copy of it, and it is remarkable to actually see them and hear them talk and watch them fly. Like I say, remarkable group of women.
You mentioned that the USSR, Soviet Union, had women doing combat. I wondered about the effect of the wasps on other allies, Britain, France, Italy, and whether there were women pilots from other countries.
Actually, Britain had pilots and women in the service before we did. And Jackie Cochran, who is the most famous, one of the most famous, along with Amelia Earhart, had actually gone to England in 1942 to work with the women pilots over there to see what kind of training they were getting and to see what could be done, because she did want to bring that back here. She felt very definitely that we would be involved in the war, and that the support that the women pilots gave to free up the men to do the actual combat and the fighting was really so strong. So when she came back, she had all of that knowledge. Canada had some women pilots, but the only country that allowed the women to actually participate in the combat, to my knowledge, was Russia. And their women were fierce. They were fierce. And I'm sure ours would have been too if they had been allowed in the combat, because they were so strong on why they were doing this.
In your research, did you read anything about the women pilots ferrying planes to the Pacific area?
I don't remember. It seemed to me, I remember a story about a woman who was actually doing her aerial work in Hawaii at the time that Japan bombed Pearl Harbor. She was there. So I think that they did fly all over and across the oceans. It wasn't just over land and over the United States. Any other questions? Yes? I'm not sure. The ones that I read about were mostly single. The question is, were they single or married when they went into the WASPs? I think there was one that had 2 children and joined, but I didn't look at all 1,000 of them, But that would be a really good subject to research. Any other questions? Well, thank you. And if you feel it in your heart, they would really appreciate a donation to the National WASP